Some years ago, a wise commentator wrote, "You may not need a revolution to establish a democracy, but you must have a democracy to establish a revolution." 1926, the 150th year of America's independence. From east to west, girdling the continent, a lush and a lusty land. Yet even then, the signs were present. The ominous whispers. If you look beyond the fields, poverty, like a cancer, malignant. And beyond the facade of the skyline, swept under the city's rug, teeming millions, never more than a copper coin from starvation. As the decade of the 20s neared its end, the great democracy of the West, the brave new world, became aware of strange twitchings and pains. Factories, tooled to the teeth, poured out a torrent of products. But the workers' pay remained slim. And the farmer's return even slimmer. Goods piled on goods overflowed the marketplace until the heart muscles of the economy could no longer bear the strain. Chaos and despair were creeping across vast continents. And in the United States, the worldwide phenomenon of depression was echoed. The stock market plummeted in October of 1929. In one convulsive week, $30 billion in stock value vanished. Unemployment spread like a gray, thick fog. For the winter of 1932, at least 12.5 million Americans were out of work. Once I built a railroad, made it run, made it race against time. Once I built a railroad, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime? Democracy shuddered. There was despair and disbelief. And it was not only in the United States, it was here and there around the world. The gray, sullen mass of depression. This was a cross-line of history, a test point for freedom. There was a rumble and thunder, and in some places, collapse. But in the United States, there was a reserve, a stockpile of strength hitherto untapped, actually unrealized. It was spiritual more than economic. It was not made of slogans and watchwords, but of the human aspirations for freedom. This, and this alone, gave the strength for renewal, for the labors ahead in the unfinished revolution. In the 1930s, when the worldwide depression hit the United States, the fact that it was international, that no people were spared, meant very little to the man suddenly without work. If it seemed to hit harder here in the United States than elsewhere, it was because standards had been higher, prosperity greater, making the fall deeper, more precipitous, more savage, and crushing. And remember, just 30 years ago, 1932 was an election year in the United States, but it was more than election. A question was to be answered. Could democracy, could a people write its own destiny? Could they use the tools of freedom to reconstruct the house of freedom? Some thought not. No one was sure. Some said, some few said, This will be the last election. There will never be another. No one was sure. How could they be? Equal to the need for food was the need for faith. The governor of New York was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. People were attracted to his warm personality, his vitality, his courage. They liked the way he threw his head back when he laughed, the tilt of his cigarette, the way he said, "My friend." The Democratic Convention meeting in Chicago nominated FDR for president on the first ballot. Keynoting Roosevelt's campaign was his call for bold, persistent experimentation. He said, "It is common sense to take a method and try it. If it fails, admit it frankly and try another. But above all, try something. Try something." The people agreed. They said to FDR, "Try, try, try." On March 4th, 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt was inaugurated, the 32nd man to assume the office of President of the United States.
So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed effort to convert retreat into advance.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Was this true? Was it unnatural to shiver at the sight of breadwinners, men who had held down good jobs, factory foremen, bookkeepers, businessmen, shuffling along the leaden length of a bread line? Half the active manpower of the United States drifting helplessly in search of work. Marriages off 22%. Birth rate down sharply. Suicide rate 40% higher than in 1929. Nothing to fear but fear itself? Happy days are here again was the theme of the Roosevelt campaign. And now that FDR was president, somehow from within came the whisper, maybe it's true. Maybe it's true. 30 years ago, March 4th, 1933. What was the future? Would there be a future? The answer came in a drum roll of action. Congress was summoned to meet on March 9th. Congressmen and government experts worked around the clock to draft an emergency banking law to restore confidence in the banks. Stop the hysteria, the nightmare of mass withdrawal of deposits. And when Congress convened, the legislation was introduced, passed, and signed into law by the president in just under 8 hours. Democracy had stepped on the gas. By the middle of June, 300,000 boys were off the streets and out in the open working with the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, one of the many new government agencies Congress had set up to deal with problems of unemployment. The CCC boys planted the trees, made reservoirs, improved parks, forests, watersheds, and recreational areas. They reclaimed the great natural resources of the country, but more important, they reclaimed themselves. I feel almost as if I owned that land. Someday when those trees I planted grow large, I'm going back to look at them. The problem of the 13 to 15 million unemployed, nobody knew the exact figure, was tackled with a program of emergency work relief. Instead of a dole, a handout, men and women were put to work on a variety of needed projects. They built bridges, post offices, roads, and schools. It cost nearly $1 billion, but in less than a year, 4 million were back at work. What magic words, at work. Did we want to work? Listen, we had fist fights over shovels. Make no mistake, there was no overnight explosion of prosperity. The wheels were rusted, the fuel thinned out. But slowly, here a factory gate opened, there a smokestack belched. A shopkeeper took on a helper. Piecemeal, almost imperceptibly, the economy reversed direction and began the slow pull upward. Depression was an old story to the farmer. He'd lived with it ever since the end of the First World War. He had lived in a weird world where bountiful crops glutted, overpowered a market too poor to purchase. Now the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, the AAA, was created to put new underpinning to the farm economy. Production was curtailed. The farmer was paid for crops he volunteered not to raise. And gradually, farm prices rose. And if the farmer could not luxuriate, he could at least survive. And so, in the first few months of the recovery program, the objective was emergency relief. Quick, immediate relief to the hardest hit victims of the Depression. But even then, the people were aware of a profound change in their democracy. A change born of changing times. The natural response of a free government to the challenge of the times. 70 years before, Abraham Lincoln had said, "The legitimate object of government is to do for a community of people whatever they need to have done but cannot do in their separate and individual capacities." This became the theme, the resolve of the new America that began to emerge in those crowded first days of Roosevelt's presidency. To do for the people that which they could not do or do so well for themselves. Nowhere did this concept of a partnership between the people and their government prove itself as here, in the Tennessee Valley. This was 40,000 square miles of entrenched poverty, land exhausted from overplanting, the people forever fatigued. rain turned the river into a wild bull, flooding the land, leaching out whatever good remained in the soil. The Tennessee Valley Authority, a corporation with the power of government but possessing the flexibility and initiative of a private enterprise, came to the valley, built dams, power plants, power lines, and helped reclaim the land. But then it was up to the people, the landlocked, weather-scarred stock of the Tennessee Valley. They listened as government experts carefully explained their purposes, their plans for soil conservation, flood control, power production, navigation. They listened, and they liked what they heard. And they agreed to cooperate, to supply the Tennessee Valley Authority with the richest of all resources, the energy, the affirmation of the people. As the TVA transfused the Tennessee Valley, another new government agency sprang up, the Rural Electrification Administration, the REA, to finance the construction of power lines into the most isolated rural areas of the country. "30 years late, the farms of the United States moved into the 20th century. Make no mistake, there was nothing listless in American democracy in these seething times. Each new venture was thoroughly debated. Those for, those against, made themselves heard. No one would have wanted it otherwise, for this is the leaven, the yeast of freedom, the push and pull, the give and take, the yes and no of an open society. Opposition acted as a brake. It kept the planners alert and the experimenters cautious. As a result, the wrong, the ill-advised, the unworkable dropped by the wayside. And what was left was a body of legislation that, in the years to come, was not only supported but enriched by future administrations of both major political parties, Democratic and Republican. Recovery had been the first order of business in the 1930s. The farmer was given a feeling of security. New laws granted him short-term loans to finance his day-by-day operation, long-term credit to refinance his mortgages at a low interest rate, and subsidies for removing low-yield land from production. No one expected the 12 million plus out of work to march back on a payroll overnight. But quickly on the heels of the emergency program, a far more comprehensive public works program was begun. The country was badly in need of a remodeling job, and it got it. In 1933, America was living in a house that lived on borrowed time. In June of that year, the Homeowners Loan Corporation was created to remove the threat of foreclosure. A year later, the federal government granted loans for home modernization and construction, supported and encouraged the construction of low-unit cost housing projects. These were recovery measures to re-nourish the economy, soak up the unemployed, stabilize and encourage private enterprise. The measure of America's recovery, of the resilience and health of its economy, was put to the test in 1941. Only 8 years from the very pit of depression, American enterprise was able to come through with the miracle of its war production. Unbelievable quantities of war materials, drugs, clothing, food, poured out of American factories and farms to sustain the free world in its mortal struggle with dictatorship. And after the war, consonant with its acknowledged responsibilities to the world community, American production, via the Marshall Plan, Point 4, Foreign Aid, did what needed doing to rebuild, sustain, and secure free societies on every continent of the globe. Recovery had been achieved. But now a far more complex job needed doing. Reform. The process of bringing the human scales back into equilibrium. This has been the concern of every administration since 1933. Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy. This process of sustentation was broadened to cover labor reforms, equal job opportunities, civil rights, old age benefits, social security, including medical research, medical care, education, each and every avenue of human welfare. How can one visualize the difference of 30 years? By statistics? By reciting numbers? I think not. The way to know the difference is to recall the lined, the weary, the worn-out face of the United States 30 years ago, and then to see it now. Fold down a corner of your memory at this point and mark it well. This was not done in a nation where the people are led, their lives regulated, their individuality submerged. This was done in a nation where the people lead and the government follows, where each man for himself carves his monument, where a man can be for or against, but either way is heard. What is ahead? This for sure, an enormous adventure. There will be dips and surges in the economy. This is to be expected. But now, with the built-in safeguards, the government always on the alert, there will be no boom or bust. The progression to higher standards, more equality of opportunity will continue. Problems? Of course. The new technology, automation, will produce problems aplenty. But this time the United States will not be caught off guard. In 1962, President Kennedy signed into law the Manpower Development and Training Act. This look-ahead legislation establishes a program of re-education, retraining of workers today for the new skills they will need tomorrow. So far we have come from the hands-off attitude of 30 years ago. A word of summary. The past 30 years of development and progress in the United States has proved the concept of modern democracy as a partnership, a joint venture between the people and their government in the preservation of a free and vital society. Thomas Paine, a great patriot, called the American Revolution of 1776 a spark never to be extinguished. The revolution he knew, the struggle for independence and individual freedom, continues to our own day, and it will forever remain unfinished, for the dreams of men defy horizons.
Negotiators for both sides expressed satisfaction with the contract and the belief that it's fair and equitable and will lead to stable labor management relations in the industry. Seems a long way back, the many months ago to when this started. The pledge we all made then is still true, and we're going to keep that pledge, and that is to have a government that will be of the people of California. Partisanship ends as of today. We who are Republicans have been handed a unique challenge ourselves and a responsibility to offer something that the people of this country are crying out for. They are crying out for leadership. Leadership that will restore our economy, restore the soundness of our currency, leadership that will restore honor and integrity to government, a leadership that will say to all the nations of the world, yes, we want peace, but we will maintain the strength to see that we have peace. We will not accept it as a dispensation of some foreign country given to us as a favor. negotiators for both sides expressed satisfaction with the contract and the belief that it's fair and equitable and will lead to stable labor management relations in the industry. Seems a long way back, many months ago to when this started. The pledge we all made then is still true, and we're going to keep that pledge, and that is to have a government that will be of the people of California. Partisanship ends as of today. We who are Republicans have been handed a unique challenge ourselves and a responsibility to offer something that the people of this country are crying out for. They are crying out for leadership. Leadership that will restore our economy, restore the soundness of our currency, leadership that will restore honor and integrity to government, a leadership that will say to all the nations of the world, yes, we want peace, but we will maintain the strength to see that we have peace. We will not accept it as a dispensation of some foreign country given to us.
The Motion Picture Industry Council meets to draft a letter to the House Un-American Affairs Committee, now in session in Hollywood. The affiliated organizations represent the major portion of the industry, and Chairman Alan Rivkin reads before the council the letter to Congressman Woods, who is conducting the inquiry. This is the industry's unequivocal and loyal stand on the controversial question.
The Motion Picture Industry Council reaffirms its consistent opposition to communism, its works, its members, its methods. It wants to emphasize that, with the overwhelming majority of the American people, it believes that a clear and present danger to our nation exists. The Motion Picture Industry Council offers its strength and support to any legally constituted body that has as its object the exposure and destruction of the International Communist Party conspiracy. Our position is no different today than it was earlier in the year when the March 21st statement was made. We are hopeful that through and as a result of the hearings of your committee, ways and means will be provided which will enable the nation to fairly, legally, and effectively deal with the problems of communist or subversive elements. Very truly yours, the Motion Picture Industry Council.
General James A. Van Fleet and Syngman Rhee, President of the Republic of Korea, arrive at the 9th Army Training Center 15 miles north of Seoul. Here they inspect the results of the intensive retraining of South Korean troops. Under the supervision of a special corps of United States military advisors, the Republic's Army has been turned into a first-class fighting force. The President watches the expert marksmanship of his troops and a run-through of an infiltration course. Ready for any renewed outburst by Red forces, these well-trained men show a steadfast determination to defend their country. These are newsreel pictures of military alertness in Korea. Another side of the picture is filmed by Department of Defense cameras. Blood donations have saved the lives of thousands of our men in Korea who would otherwise have died. All of these wounded heroes have been given a new lease on life and returned to their homes and their families. But the reserve supply is very low. There is an urgent need for blood donations to save the lives of those we want to see again. In Lido, Venice, Riviera of the Adriatic, Winston Churchill prepares for a dip as only Churchill can do it. The world statesman invades the Adriatic for a swim before sterner political duties recall him to England. Despite a wish for privacy, somehow the long-distance lens of the camera strays in his direction and catches the former Prime Minister in a strictly amphibious position with no cigar. On the beach at Lido today, but tomorrow the political wars of Great Britain with an upcoming election call him. At 77, the political arena beckons, and never did he throw in the towel. The Motion Picture Division of the United Nations Day Citizens Committee presents a cake to President Truman at the White House, marking the 6th anniversary of the signing of the United Nations Charter, which occurs October 24th. The President expresses his appreciation of UN cookery.
Thank you very much for the cookbook. I've long ago quit talking about Mama's cooking because I have a good cook at home. And she also has made a good cook out of the musician who is our daughter. She can cook too. I can't say that she likes to cook as well as she does to sing, but then she's able to do it. And on my advice, I hope every young lady in the United States will learn to make cakes like this. Thank you.
They turn back the clock in the ancient town of Foligno in Italy for a revival of an ancient sporting event of the Middle Ages. Spectators and competitors alike are handsomely attired in medieval finery for the Quintana, an age-old sport for horsemen with eagle eyes. Fair equestriennes provide a touch of glamour to an already glamorous affair. The king of the Quintana holds court over a colorful assemblage taken right out of the pages of history. In the Quintana, hard-riding cavaliers gallop 3 times around the field, trying to spear 3 rings held by a giant, representing the god of war. A merry-go-round in a medieval setting. Cheers for a cavalier who won by a whisker. To an international audience, British plane makers parade their latest rocket-firing jet fighters. The world's largest airliner, the Brabazon, and a jet bomber, the U.S. is now mass-producing the Canberra. Next, the new 4-jet bomber, the Valiant, one of the most powerful aerial weapons of the jet age. A new Hawker Hurricane is ready to go through its paces. Britain lays claim to a new world speed record for its new Hawker fighter, just one of many new jet planes swelling democracy's aerial arsenal.
same waves that wash Bangkok also touch Malaysia and South Vietnam and the Philippines. And the waves move out. They wash against South Korea and Australia and New Zealand. And many thousands of miles away, the same Pacific waves touch my own nation and Hawaii and Alaska and California. These waves speak of the deepest meanings of my journey, that we are Pacific neighbors with a common destiny.
President Lyndon Johnson journeyed to the Pacific in 1966 because he was invited to the Manila Summit Conference of 7 nations and because he needed to see for himself the changing face of Asia.
I will go to see and to listen and to learn and to act with our partners to bring an honorable peace to Southeast Asia at the first day that it is possible.
The President's trip would cover the Pacific, starting with New Zealand and Australia, then the Manila Summit Conference of Nations Allied in the Vietnam War, then Thailand and Malaysia, and finally Korea. On such a wide-ranging trip, most men are absorbed in the plans, the events, and the news of the moment. But a president is concerned with generations.
As we consider our future in the Pacific, there are many searching questions that we can ask about our past. How well have we understood the feelings and the aspirations of Asia's people? How well have we understood the course of revolution? How well have we understood the shifting tides of nationalism in all of its forms? American policy must be the policy of an open mind.
Mr. President, Mrs. Johnson, ladies and gentlemen, and particularly boys and girls, can I suggest that each and every one of you follow the example?
The Honorable Keith Holyoake, Prime Minister of New Zealand, greeted the President and Mrs. Johnson.
So, on behalf of the people of New Zealand and the government of New Zealand, I extend to you both a very warm, a very human welcome, 1,000 welcomes to you both. And on behalf of the Maori people who've already welcomed you in their language, Kia ora. Good luck, good health.
Mr. Prime Minister, Mrs. Holyoake, Mr. Neath, Mr. White, my friends of New Zealand, I want to thank you for coming here in this rainy weather, exposing yourself to give us this neighborly welcome. And if you will be good enough, I hope that you will wish me on my return to have the same kind of rainy reception at my home ranch in Texas as I'm getting here today.
On October 20th, the President and Mrs. Johnson arrived in Wellington, New Zealand.
We came by jet from Hawaii and Samoa, riding the smooth jet stream at more than 500 miles an hour. Ms. Johnson and I are quite honored to be in New Zealand. Physically, we have not entirely adjusted to the southern hemisphere after our long flight. But you may be sure that our hearts are already in residence. And it was quite a change from our last arrival in New Zealand in the spring of 1942, when both of our nations faced very grim problems together. Your welcome was as warm then as it was today, although not as numerous. But it was outgoing, and it was generous.
New Zealanders twice left these beautiful islands to fight for the freedom and liberty of all men. Ours was a unity of nations who longed to live in peace, but who understood from the bitter lessons of two wars what the consequences of appeasement would be. Every man wants peace. That's something that all of you should take your cognizance of. You can't separate men by those who want peace, those who don't want peace. Every man wants peace.
The President's itinerary in every country included private talks with government leaders and, whenever possible, visits to rural areas. Westward in the late afternoon, the President and Mrs. Johnson flew 1,300 miles from New Zealand to Australia. They were met by Prime Minister and Mrs. Harold Hope. Not convey to you the admiration, the affection that I have for the Australian people. I have so much in my heart that I would like to tell you that I really don't trust myself. When the fighting stopped, Korea faced every conceivable difficulty. Millions of refugees, transportation in ruins, its cities in ashes. Here is one of the truly dramatic stories of our time. A nation transformed within a generation. It is the intelligence and the energy and
the hard work and the genius of the Korean people that are creating a new future for Korea. From there, I have seen how you turn the old circular plots into large, productive squares. We have seen the great evidence of flood control and irrigation and erosion control and the reforestation of your hills.
This hill, from this day forward, would be known as Johnson Hill. After a journey of 17 days, 7 nations, and 31,000 miles, a brief moment in history, a tired president headed home.
I have seen the palaces and the universities, the ordinary homes and the village schools, the new land developments and the new strains of rice. I have seen the cabinet members and the school children, farm experts and village leaders. And I have seen our fighting men. I've seen millions of faces, friendly and well-wishing. And I have been deeply encouraged